When do we begin? Hi. Her with her? Okay. I was very curious. I went, okay, everybody's here. And I went, and someone else?
I did not want to run all the way home to figure out, because they're out for startups because she's only has to show for athletics today. I just said you're coming with me.
Yeah, my daughter didn't tell me about that at all. And then she showed up to school, and I was like, there's nobody here. And she went, and I left her there. No, she went to Commerce. But, yeah, I was kind of like, I guess just stay here, and you can hang out with your boyfriend at school. Turned out her boyfriend was more responsible and knew what he was doing that day and was going to hang out with his own friends. And she's like, can I go home? And I was like, nope. You made your bed. You will lie in it. Not your actual bed, the one that means you're still at school. Yeah, that was what she had to deal with. So, today, we're going to continue talking about frost, but at least as long as the track record holds with the other classes, we're only going to get to talk about stopping by woods in a snowy evening and Mending Wall, and then I'll briefly explain what after apple picking and birches are about, enough for the quiz. And if we ever get a chance to talk about them more, we will, but we may not have to. But discussion posts, there are none due this coming weekend. There's only a quiz due by April 14th, so keep that in mind. However, there will be a discussion post due after the research paper is due on April 21st. And then, technically speaking, the discussion posts 11 and 12 are due by April 21st as well. So so if you don't turn in your research paper on time, that particular next Thursday is when it's due, then you'll have to continue writing that paper on the weekend and turn in 3 discussion posts. It's going to be a busy weekend. You might as well just turn in the paper on time, do the discussion posts, and boom, done. But then you got to do the labs because they're due next. But then you're done. Sort of. I mean, there's not a whole lot left. There's paper revisions due, then research presentations week 15. I will show you how to do those on week 14, day 1. And let's see. Oh, don't forget, census analysis 3 is due tonight. Over the poetry. 1 poem, not multiple. However, my suggestion to you would be turn something in if you've got nothing. But instead of, like, let's say if you've got no planning in yet, if you don't have your works cited and thesis, then do that first. Get that to me so you can have me say, no, that won't work first, and then I can tell you eventually over time how it will eventually work. Because that's more important, I think, than getting that census analysis essay completely done tonight. Turn like a placeholder in is what I would do. What I want to do first is actually talk about the sample research paper. In talking about the sample research paper, I will be pointing out to you what I want you to bring on peer review day, which is next Thursday. In-class paper peer review, which is important for why? Well, yeah, the obvious benefits of feedback, but achievement, there you go. Yeah, you can get your achievement points that way. And that is actually tied to the one where you can round up from an 87 to a 90, or an 88 to a 90, or 89 to a 90. So that's a good one to have. That's tied to coming to both conferences and doing the in-class paper peer review. What else? Is there questions before I begin? About anything? Paper?
At this point, how long do you think, what priority does research preparation planning take in the grading order?
Still number 1. I still do 1301 first because they have annotated bibliography due tonight. So it's 1301 planning, then 1302 planning. I finished discussion posts last night, so y'all's 1302 discussion posts are done. Then, at least for tonight only, it's going to be any revisions that are out there or late assignments that have been submitted. I'll do those next. But starting tomorrow, I'll move on to whatever papers have been turned on in time for census analysis 3 and annotated bibliography. I'll grade this weekend, but I won't be grading them on Saturday because I'll be at Six Flags. I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun when you're young. It really is. But then you get older. And
I believe it.
roller coasters are when you try to insert excitement into your life. And when you're older, you don't need any more excitement. There's plenty. All you have to look forward to is back pain, being really tired and sweaty.
Spending a lot on food.
And I have to spend a lot of money on food, which I've already kind of decided I'm going to like. This is one of the times when I really wish that lembas bread from Lord of the Rings was a real thing. So I could just bring that with me and take a nibble and be like, I'm good for the day. Because, man, that really sucks. Having to spend all that money on. And then my brother's just sent me a link a minute ago, and he's like, I found out there's a PDF for gluten-free at Six Flags. And I'm like, oh my gosh. He really does legit need it. But now it means we have to only eat at certain places, which are probably more expensive. I was hoping to eat whatever the cheapest food was. Maybe if somebody threw a hot dog into the trash and ate like half of it, I would just grab that. And you don't understand how cheap I am. I'm pretty cheap.
You got Six Flags?
Yeah.
You know you can get that food pass thing, right?
Yeah, but that costs money too. And I'm still gonna what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring a sandwich in my back pocket or something, sit on it all day, and then I'll make sure it's peanut butter and jelly, so it does that really cool peanut butter and jelly thing where it just turns into one amorphous kind of sludgy thing. You know what I'm talking about? You ever pack a peanut butter jelly sandwich? The bread sort of dissolves.
Yeah, but if you go to enough, it will work.
With the pass, I just don't think it will be for me. But I'm going to end the day dehydrated and hungry, which is how I planned on ending it anyway.
Okay, so the unlimited soda pass is kind of nice though, just for a day. It's like $15.
Yeah, but it was like
and you and
$100.
your entire party can have unlimited soda.
My daughter and her friend, for some reason, it was the cheapest way I could think to do this. My wife wanted me to buy myself a season pass and my daughter a season pass because it comes with 2 extra tickets, so I'll have somebody to be with me, my brother, and she'll have a friend to be with her best friend. I just bought her and her best friend the season pass because I'm not going to go back. I don't want to. But if they have some group is going or friends are going, they're like, you want to go to Six Flags? You'd be like, you go, have fun. They'll take you.
We just did it where you pay $6 a month and that's it.
$6 a month. We don't go that much. I'm not doing that.
There's a place called Johnny Rockets in there. They have amazing food.
Is there anybody who donates uneaten food to people? That's what I want. I was thinking about bringing a fanny pack, one for me and my brother, and then also he's wearing a straw hat to protect his skin, and I'm going to do the same thing, and so we'll look really cool and embarrass my daughter.
Just tell them you're hypoglycemic and you have to have carry some phone with you.
They won't let you carry food to the park?
No, you can't carry it to the park. No,
You can't
but my
say
daughter was
use your bag.
hypoglycemic.
That's why I said bring the modifier.
Oh, I'm leaving that part.
And she had to have stuff with her, so when she started feeling bad, she could eat and stuff, so they cannot, because it's medical, they can't tell you this.
My dad's hypoglycemic.
You're just not being creative. You have to tape it to the inside of your shirt or something.
I'd be like, I have the genetics for hypoglycemia. Speaking of the sample research paper, we are going to start talking about that instead of Six Flags, because I've already said enough. Let's see. Next. So, is this the right paper? Rural health communities? No, it's the sex paper for the other class. So, going away from this part of the syllabus and going up to the assignments section, I'll click there and we'll go down to the PDF for the planning, which y'all don't actually see that right now. What you see on Blackboard is just census analysis 3 and then the planning. I've blanked out the research essay link so nobody accidentally submits to it before they're supposed to. But I wanted to show you guys the sample paper because we haven't really talked about it at all. And I want to know what you're expected to bring for the peer review, because some people are like, what can I get away with bringing? And so I realize it's a real thing that you're thinking. So I want to kind of tell you. I'll start off with a question. So here's the sample paper. It is this long with a works cited. So that is how long that paper is. But I wanted to ask you first, where does a thesis come in the paper?
First paragraph. Last sentence of the first paragraph, I think.
It can be put anywhere in the beginning paragraph.
First and last, right? You want to start with it, and then you want to link it back and tie it to the thing? No?
Okay, so another way.
Somewhere in the essay.
I'm not saying I haven't heard the right answer yet.
I think it's the same goal.
Yeah, I'm just taking more or less a poll, which I could have done on the poll website, but it takes too long. Takes too long.
Restate it in the thing.
Yeah, oh yeah, you definitely want to do that. You definitely want to restate it in the conclusion. But the first time it should appear in a paper is, I think because in 1301, we called the first paragraph the introduction. People will often assume that has to be at the end of the first paragraph. But you may have before read nonfiction books or started reading a book that was about some topic you were interested in that had a chapter called Introduction that was very, very long, many, many pages. And at the end of it, it sort of laid out its purpose for the book, like what it was planning on doing. And if you think of a thesis statement as a statement of purpose for an essay, then that's sort of the same as one of those book length things. But in the book length, it did not come at the end of that first paragraph. It came at the end of the introduction. So it's because our first paragraph is generally called the introduction in most of the essays we've done so far that people often just think first paragraph. But it really is the end of an introduction, because it needs to, after you've set up everything we need to know about what's coming, then we need to see the statement of purpose. Then the rest of the paper will follow that statement of purpose through with the background information we've got. If you think films even do this, so like some films can get started pretty quickly without much background information. For example, the Avengers film that came out, Infinity War, assumes we know everything that came before it when it starts. So it doesn't do really much exposition at all. We watch a movie like, you ever seen Inception?
How about the original Star Wars? Just had like a page of...
Yeah, and it literally just put all the exposition right there at the beginning. Movie like Inception, though, it had so much of the world rules to cover that it spent almost half the movie explaining to you how the idea worked. Then the rest of the movie was sort of like the movie. So it had a huge kind of introduction that it weaved the plot into. And so different needs for different stuff like that, there are different requirements based on need. In this case, there are a number of ideas that you need to set up. If we look at what the thesis includes, I go back to the top here and I'll click the sample planning assignment. We have the references, but then we've got the thesis. The elements that it contains is you've got to mention your story, you've got to mention your real world issue. And then the human problem sort of links the two. There's some issue with humanity that we're trying to address. Then you're making a claim about how those two relate. Essentially, the claim that you're making is that these two relate. And the reasoning is they relate in this way. So that's the thesis you're ultimately going to try to get to. The problem is you have a number of ideas you need to introduce before that sentence makes any sense. If you just said that first in a paper, like it was the very first thing you said, somebody's like, first of all, what the hell is this thing in quotes? Second of all, what the hell is this church? And third of all, why do I care? So I've kind of got to set up all of those reasons before I even get to the thesis so that somebody knows. So in the sample paper, the introduction is actually 3 paragraphs. I would actually suggest having 4 paragraphs as an introduction, which is weird, but I think you'll see why when I read the sample paper. So I'm going to scroll, because you've got to cover all those ideas. So the first paragraph he has sets up the idea of hypocrisy and its problem in society. Then he summarizes Minister's Black Veil in his own way for himself so that it makes sense to the reader. Then he summarizes what the problem of the Westboro Baptist Church is. And then the thesis is this sentence right here at the beginning of the 4th paragraph. I think he should have had a couple of more sentences, maybe at least one in like a 4th paragraph that introduced like that the thesis was about to be coming. But he just starts off that 4th paragraph and then continues on with new concerns in the next sentence. I'm not so sure that I like that method of delivery. But it's still the best paper I've ever gotten in terms of like its overall. Huh?
You didn't actually write this one?
I did not. I don't write any of the sample papers. However, in this particular paper, I did rewrite his first paragraph. You'll notice it sounds a lot different than the other ones. The first paragraph sounds very robotic and cold, whereas the rest of them sound like a normal human wrote them. I sometimes think I sound like a machine. Yes?
Can you go back and like say again what the 4 paragraphs were about?
Mm-hmm. The first paragraph is going to be the kind of the human problem that gets us started in talking about this idea. So essentially what we're trying to do is set up for the reader that there is some problem with humanity that we're trying to address. In this case, it's hypocrisy. I think in yellow wallpaper in most cases it's going to be that people might have the best intentions, but not the greatest amount of respect for those they're trying to help. And that's kind of hard to fit into like one little word, but it's possible, and so on and so forth. So hypocrisy is the problem, but this one of the problems he points out here. But the second one is about the story, and the third is the real world issue. That fourth paragraph really would just be kind of like the setup of the thesis. And I don't just want it to just be the thesis, but that would be possible. It just wouldn't look right. The only issues I really have with this paper are not structural, they're just where he delineates things, like where he marks lines. Of like, here's where this paragraph stops, here's where the next one should start. I really don't like how he has the thesis as the first sentence of the fourth paragraph, but it is nonetheless where he put it. And he has the organization at least right. So let me read through the first few paragraphs here, and then I'll more or less just outline the rest of the paper. I'll tell you like what he's talking about in those portions. So an unfortunately common quality of society today, especially in groups of people who share a background of some kind, whether it be geographical, socioeconomic, or ideological, is that of hypocrisy. See how robotic that sounds? Because I'm really saying an unfortunately common quality of society today is that of hypocrisy, but I added all the extra info in there. Like I could have just said it simply.
Well, you need your word count.
Huh?
I said, well,
Well, I'm not going for word count, and in fact, it's way higher than it needs to be on this paper. Groups of like-minded people who share some type of worldview have the tendency to judge others by that worldview, often in a way that is not only off-putting to those who are more sympathetic, but completely immoral to the general population. It is only when attention is brought to the foul behaviors resulting from hypocrisy that anything can be done about them. More or less, it's like when we see people who are hypocrites, we don't like it, and only in calling attention to that hypocrisy can we do anything about it. So essentially, the first paragraph is setting up the idea that hypocrisy is bad. Let's all acknowledge that, and in acknowledging it, we can do something about it. But without saying we, because it's not a first-person paper, it's third person. Now, I'm going to set up the story. And I'll tell you that mostly this story, the real story, let me summarize it for you again real quick, because it's one we haven't read. I didn't want to take away any of the possibilities of what you could do. Minister's black veil. Preacher shows up to church one day with a veil on his face, a black veil. Very weird. Everybody's like, why has he got the veil on? What's going on? This is weird. And he never really says what it's about. And then at the end of the story, like he's on his deathbed, and they're like, you can take the veil off now. We understand it's a part of you. And he's like, I can't take the veil off. And he says, you think I'm wearing the veil, but I look out and I see on all of you there's a veil. So like from his perspective, they all are separating themselves from each other. But from their perspective, he's separating himself from them. But it was just one big long 30-year-long preacher lesson, I guess, which that's dedication, but nonetheless a bit extreme.
Was that actually what it was, or did he just not want to tell them?
It's weird because the story sort of hints that there could be a reason he's wearing the veil, but because it never confirms it, like any reason why, we realize it could be that there is no reason whatsoever, and the wearing of the veil itself is his purpose. Just so that like he'll expose people's like hypocrisy of like gossiping about each other, like what did he do wrong when they're doing something wrong and asking, you know, like in even thinking negative thoughts about him, they're doing something wrong. So when he summarizes this story, I can tell you the whole story is really it follows more or less the minister, and the townsfolk are kind of a background element, not like Rose for Emily where like the townsfolk guy is the narrator of the story. Sort of like a background element. So it's really weird that he summarizes this in this way, because it's kind of like he's focusing on something that only takes up about 20% of the story. So he says, in the story of the minister's black veil, Reverend Hooper mysteriously begins to wear a veil for unexplained reasons. Though Hooper was a respected man of his residence, the townsfolk begin to shun him because of his new peculiar appearance. Despite the fact that Hooper had not changed anything about his actions and had remained the same compassionate minister throughout the story, the citizens of Milford only recognized him by his outward being. From this, the reader begins to get a feeling of animosity between the town and the Reverend. So he's focusing purely on the townsfolk when they don't really even factor that heavily into the story. They're just the people who sort of look at him. I mean, there's a portion of the story, too, that takes place where he's in his house and his fiance is like, yeah, you can take it off when you're here because I don't need to, you don't have to prove anything to me. And he's like, I can't take it off. This is my mission. And she's like, no, seriously, take it off. And he's like, no, not even for you. And she leaves him. So he's like really dedicated to this idea of the veil. But that doesn't even factor into this summary because it's all about the townsfolk. Now, the Westboro Baptist Church, he summarizes in this way, and he tries to make that summary sort of fit with the one he's had with the story. So he says, in modern times, the Westboro Baptist Church has begun to publicly persecute those that they see as unholy and sinful. The church came into the public's notice whenever they protested the funeral of Matthew Shepard, who was beaten to death for being a homosexual. So they protested a funeral of a guy who had just been beaten to death for being homosexual because he was homosexual. It's kind of like instead of beating him to death, they just held signs. But more or less did the same thing. Since 1991, the church has held over 41,000 protests, picketing events ranging from military funerals to high school theater productions. Over the years, they have continued to show their disdain for those who stray against the Calvinist faith by provocatively voicing their God Hates Fags campaigns, where they would go to funerals for military members, and they were protesting the don't ask, don't tell policy, where like you could be gay and serve in the military as long as you didn't say that you were gay. They were protesting that by holding up these signs that they made that said God hates fags, much as Jesus would have done. Nobody? That was sarcasm. The fact that y'all didn't giggle or go, what? Kind of worries me. It's fairly clear that I don't believe there's a part of the Bible that I would have guessed where Jesus would have gone, guys, let's make these signs. And then like they hold him and it's like, okay. Perhaps he would have eaten at a table with them, But he's trying to point out the hypocrisy of this act and that it doesn't even fit with the Bible itself. He thinks it's very strange. So that's what the writer of this essay is doing. And he ends with this thesis idea that, so he set up the world issue, or he set up the human problem, the story, the world issue, and now Hawthorne's portrayal of the hypocritical townsfolk in the Minister's Black Veil is nearly identical to the protests of Westboro Baptist Church in the sense that both claim a profound level of morality, yet only notice when others around them commit sin, never themselves. He never mentions this, but it's sort of like that biblical idea of make sure you pull the giant plank of wood out of your own eye before you look at the speck in somebody else's, is sort of that idea that he's addressing here. So I'm not going to read all the paragraphs of this paper. I am going to read this first one, though, because this is how he conducts all of his paragraphs, and I like it, and I'd like for all of you to sort of model your paragraphs in the paper after this. I'm not going to read it quite yet, though, because I just want to tell you that intro all the way through the thesis, that's what I would suggest everybody have for peer review day.
So like a one-page.
Yeah, kind of like a one-page, so that people who are sitting in front, because it's going to be very hard if you show up with just like a single baby paragraph that day for peer review, and you've said like, the yellow wallpaper is similar to abortion, and that's like all you've got written, and they're like, how? And you're like, I don't know, I was thinking I'd figure that out along the way, and you're like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. So you need to at least have put some thought into like how those two relate, thought about the story in the context, thought about the world issue in the context, that human problem that connects them, and then come up with a decent thesis. That's something I feel like somebody could read and then help provide useful feedback on. How many people are in this room? Oh, wait, not 6. Why can't I do math? 8, 11, 13, 16, 21. So when the 7 or 8 people show up for the peer review, you'll all need to have that stuff with you. Because I think that that'll be the most useful thing for all of you to be able to make it not a complete waste of your time. And I will look around and see, like, if you've brought nothing but like your works cited and your thesis that day, I'll acknowledge that you've got it and like let you stay in the room, but I'm not going to give you credit for having been here. So just bring something useful. Also, if you haven't had your works cited and your thesis approved by that day, I won't let you participate in the peer review. Because I don't want you even moving forward and trying to write something if I haven't approved it yet. Why are you wasting your time? But one of the worst ways to like recover from a 0 that I have in class is sometimes when students will submit a paper idea and they'll submit the paper and try to skip past the approval process, and then I go, oh, that wouldn't have worked. I wish you'd asked me first. 0. That's a nightmare. So that's what I'm trying to do with the planning process, is just so that you can get it approved, then start working on it, so that it's not like me having to tell you later it never would have worked in the first place. So, questions about that? You got a week to get that figured out. Do it. And don't like the night before be like, I'll send that to him and try to get it approved so I can bring the peer review tomorrow. Because you probably won't get it approved on the first try. Most people who turned it in immediately didn't get it approved on the first try. Most people had to go at least 1 pass. And then some people are right now on like their 4th. So just keep that in mind.
Have you had anyone propose to do yellow wallpaper and abortion at this point?
No,
No?
I don't think so. Not off the top of my head. Let's see. So this first paragraph here. Let's talk about, and when I say first paragraph, I mean the first one after the introduction. So like his first point he's making and showing that similarity. Like basically the first, like number 1 in his outline. He says, in the minister's black veil, Hooper is in conflict with the townspeople, though there has been no provocation. Hooper essentially minds his own business while bearing his veil, while the town around him persecutes him for acting atypical. This is no different than the God Hates Fags protest by the Westboro Baptist. The church purposely and harshly protests out on the streets against homosexuality by damning gays to hell and throwing out derogatory insults. The church purposely advocates their hostility toward homosexuals even though they have done nothing to offend or harm them. So he's trying to use parallel language. He's saying there's been no provocation with Hooper, and he says they've done nothing to offend or harm in the Westboro Baptist. And I like how he's trying to show how they parallel. And in the last sentence, he's trying to, once again, show you how they link. He says, though the Westboro Baptist Church may have a more extreme way of persecution, it is essentially the same as the town folks in the minister's black veil. This is because both show disdain for one who goes against a societal norm. So anytime he's trying to show how they're similar, he's explaining how that is the case right at the end of that paragraph, just so that we can transition from idea to idea clearly. And now I'll just more or less talk about what the rest of it contains. Yes?
Never mind, I just answered my own question.
Good. I'm glad I helped. The problem was your question saw that it might be answered by me, got intimidated, and then answered itself. That's what happened. It was like, oh crap, Nichols is coming. Kind of like when somebody pulls a computer out and says like, this isn't working, and then they put it in front of me and I'm like, it works, and they're like, oh, I don't know, I just couldn't figure it out. I'm like, yeah, I got scared. Computers are afraid of me. It says me like I've been spending like the last week trying to get my VR figured out. I think I finally got it last night. Interestingly enough, the Bluetooth base station, I had to disable Bluetooth so it only connect through Wi-Fi. I guess it was at one point doing a Bluetooth communication, it would cause it to stutter and it'd crash the whole program. Nobody cared. Huh?
So the Vive?
Yeah.
I didn't know the base station was Bluetooth.
It could do Bluetooth updates, but for some reason that can disrupt it. I saw somebody online said, yeah, I just disabled Bluetooth and it worked. And I said, it can't be that simple, and I did it. And I was able to get 5 minutes into Skyrim instead of 30 seconds. So we'll see. I'm going to test it later and see if I can go 15, 20 minutes. I might be happy. It doesn't really disrupt the way I play either, because every single time I have any battle, I save. Like if I fight anything, I save, so I don't want to lose it. What we're not going to do is continue talking about Skyrim the rest of the time, because I can do that. And it's very hard not to. It's a fun game, especially when all you do is... I don't have to...
You can do fire.
I'm going to keep talking. So what he does next is he talks about how Reverend Hooper The next comparison he makes is that Reverend Hooper goes to funerals. He acts respectfully, but the town gossips about him at the funeral. And then what he makes the comparison with the Westboro Baptist Church, of course, they're known for their funeral protests. So they're supposed to go to a funeral and act respectful as people are expected to, and instead they hold up these signs that say God hates fags. So that's the next comparison that he makes. The next portion, and that actually takes up the next page and a half. The next portion, he points out that the minister on his deathbed makes that statement where he says, "You think I'm wearing the veil, but I look out and see you wearing the veil." And he more or less just points out that after that Westboro Baptist Church look at others and they see the problems in others instead of themselves. They haven't had anybody, though, point out to them yet in a successful way that they need to look at themselves, not other people first. But he points that out. And then he does something that's actually really risky, and I wish he had a new paragraph here where it says both. Because, and this is one of the reasons I include this paper, because often students think that they can't include religion at all in papers. The careful thing you have to do is synthesis analysis, of course. If you're like, the reason I feel this way about this poem is because I've always gone to church and that has informed my opinion on it. That makes perfect sense. I mean, you're talking about your personal opinion. But when you're talking about an argumentative research paper that's supposed to be universal and appeal to everybody, you can't say things like homosexuality is wrong because God says so, because not everybody's a Christian. So you have to make those cases universally and not just for one group. So in this case, what he's doing is pointing out that they're hypocrites based on their misreading of the Bible, not because he's saying he believes in the Bible, but because the groups that are not obeying the Bible verses believe in the Bible. So he's essentially saying they have a guidebook for their faith and they're not following aspects of that guidebook. And I'll show you how he does that very skillfully. So he says, both the ministers of Black Veil and the Westboro Baptist Church go against their faith by even going against the words of the Bible, which would be considered divine law. And I think he means in their case. The ministers of Black Veil, the townsfolk, blatantly go against the verse of John 7:24, which states, "Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment," by looking at his veil and then judging him based upon it. This shows that the townspeople defile their own faith by their purposely ignoring the verse to Judge Hooper, or not knowing the verse at all. Either way, the townsfolk went against the word of God, making them the same, if not worse, than Reverend Hooper, along with them making a mockery of their faith. The Westboro Baptist Church goes against the Bible verse of James 4:12, which states, "There is only one lawgiver and judge, he who is able to save and to destroy, but who are you to judge your neighbor?" This shows that despite their claims of high morality, they fail to follow their own faith. The church continually condemns people to hell and states that God hates them, but they fail to realize that the Bible states that only God himself can make such decisions and statements. So along with the townsfolk and ministers of Black Veil, the Westboro Baptist Church also fails to comply with its own faith and makes a mockery of it. So he's not saying, I literally, when I read this paper, I can't tell whether the kid believes in the Bible or not. And that's how it should be. He's just saying, this group claims to follow the Bible, this group claims to follow the Bible. Here's a verse they both aren't following, regarding the very thing that they're supposedly following, that would govern their actions. So that's a very careful way of doing it and something that I have quite high respect for. And nobody ever has quite done this as well as he does. The way he, every single time, he has very specific points he makes about actions and their parallels in the real world. And every single time he ends a paragraph or ends an idea, he will once again remind you in what way those two things are the same. He's very careful about the construction of the paper. I did give him a 97 at the time because he was a little wordy in a few sections. And I had not yet changed his first paragraph on his hypocrisy. For him, it was a weird paragraph. It didn't make any sense to me. So those are what got him the point problems. And actually, his paper, I don't know if you could tell, 1,618 words. You only have to have 1,250. That was at a time I required it. But I have noticed that even though I've lowered the requirement, the best papers tend to float around 1,500 words, which is around 4.5 to 5 pages, not just the 4. So the last paragraph he has here, more or less, it summarizes the whole paper really well. He hits every point and the thesis, rewords it like Laura said. The townsfolk and ministers of Black Veil and Westboro Baptist Church resemble each other because they both fail to directly comply with their faith that they claim to have profound morality for. Both blatantly judge others around them and continually try to play the role of God. Despite the fact that the Bible, their source of faith, specifically states that only God can determine the fate of people, both the townsfolk and the Westboro Baptist Church choose to ignore it on several occasions. This not only makes a mockery out of the religion that is followed, but also creates hypocrisy. I really like it. Remember, you only have to have the intro with a thesis. And the intro is how many paragraphs? 3 to 4, yeah. It's a kind of a fluid number. Questions about any of this? Oh, also the works cited page is on the next page. And I provided, because I figured this out. I figured it out, guys. And I asked a student, he gave me confirmation. I was like, why am I getting all these weird editions of books on people's works cited page that they're proposing? It's not arguing about literature, which I give you the citation for. All you have to do is change the page numbers, the story title, and the name. That's not even in that textbook. I've just given you an example that you can follow for your own citation. And I was like, it's not an online edition that they're citing. It's a weird paperback edition they're claiming to have. And I figured it out. New, Google, yellow wallpaper citation. Oh, look, MLA. Copy. Paste. I was wondering, why am I getting these weird citations with authors' years of living on them? And why is it claiming to be MLA? Like, I just don't get it. And I finally figured out. I had underestimated the laziness of Generation Z. Where the credibility and reliability of information matter to you so little that you're like, as long as I get the author name and the title of the article, it doesn't really matter where I say I read it. Right? Even with my talk about how mowing is completely different in the Poetry Foundation versus the paper edition. God, I'm so disappointed in myself in not being able to. I mean, I got a daughter. I see laziness. I see it. I underestimated. I'm sorry. My apologies. Yeah, so just best to use my citation I provided as an example, which I thought was lazy enough. But if you can't do it from your bed with your phone in your hands, I guess it's not easy enough. Huh?
You overestimated our common sense.
Not common sense. I overestimated your need to get things right.
Common sense is copy and paste. And
Yeah.
you just change it.
Yeah.
That's it. You're good.
But that requires somebody to, you know what that requires? You have to have the book next to you to look the pages up. And that book's all the way over there. Like it's on my like cabinet. Like it's, huh? But then I gotta flip to another tab. I mean, it's just, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? I can't copy paste two things at the same time until they come up with that. You need like a scrolling copy paste where it keeps like your last 10 items that you've copy pasted, so you can like go back through and keep using them. You can get it as like an extension or like a separate file.
They already have it on Android. I just don't know how to do it.
Oh.
It's just
You can clipboard it, and does it keep the last few? Because I've tried to clipboard before, and it would never pull up things that I recently did. Really? Oh, I might. Oh, I may have turned it off because I thought that was a weird privacy issue. I was like, maybe I don't want every single thing I ever copy pasted anywhere to be like saved on my computer, because that would be weird. Let's see. Next. Questions? Any preguntas? Well, then let's talk about.
Not super relevant, but you give like a 97 with an explanation of why it's not 100, but not a 95. Like usually you go like 95 and it's like all good.
Yeah.
You know, you did a great job. Something like that.
He's 95 is 100.
I heard this high everywhere.
95? No, this is actually incorrect. This is a positive x graph. So it really should be, it's kind of like this. What is that, y equals x squared?
Yeah.
Ish. So this is the amount of explanation I provide at 95, which is almost nothing, because you've basically, to me, gotten at 100. If I give you explanation at 96, 97, that's things I think you could do to reasonably get to 100. Sometimes in a case of 99, I actually think this is usually like what to get to the next point. Down here, you've done so much wrong like in like the 60s, I've got to say a lot of crap. But yeah, 95, yeah. So I'd give more explanation. So if somebody was like, you know, I feel like I could get 1 point higher out of this, they could. But it's mine. Yeah, that. Are you happy you asked the question? Okay. Is everybody else happy you asked the question? You don't care, do you? You should care.
I mean, if you get like a
Ish. No, I don't provide any explanation though, which is weird. It's got to be weird when you get a 95 and there's nothing, and somebody else you see got a 97, but they've got like this massive paragraph of explanation.
So where's the cutoff when you stop giving an explanation? Is it like?
Oh yeah, actually, this is not a real graph.
Okay.
This is what I would say. I'd say it actually goes like. In fact, let's change it. If I had to be real with you, it's more like this. So that I'll try to give you a little bit to get higher if I think it's possible. 95 won't say much. In 60s and 70s, I think it's possible. If you gave me something that's less than a 60 or 70, I don't think you did much in the first place. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, finish it. That's all I'll say. I'm like, oh, I see you giving me a page. Do better. Because I'm like, you don't think that I'm worth it? I don't think you're worth
So
it.
theoretically,
What?
if you're at like 98 and you point out a couple things wrong with it, then they fix one of them, and it's better, so you feel obligated to give another point, right?
Not necessarily.
And then they fix the other one after they already did the other point.
Same amount of points.
Straight kicking them.
And that doesn't work. Then.
Yeah, it isn't.
All you're doing is creating work for both.
Yeah, I will be honest. Sometimes I see that somebody who's had a 98 and I didn't give any explanation to that I thought was relevant to getting to a 99 will ask, like, then they'll submit a revision, and I'm just like, here we go. And so I'm like, I got to look and reread this damn paper to say, yeah, it's basically the same. I don't see anything markedly different that's going to make me raise it up. And now you made me develop negative opinions toward you as a person. It's undue risk. No, I'm kidding. I won't actually. Yep. Huh? Move towns? Oh. Move seats. No, actually, I will never lower your grade. The only time I'll ever lower your grade is if I discover plagiarism that I hadn't originally discovered. I go, oh yeah, I didn't notice you plagiarized the first time, so the 75 is now 0. That is the only time I'll do that. But I actually reserve that right in the syllabus. If you go look, it says, keep in mind if I discover plagiarism at any point in the process, your grade automatically goes down to a 0. It's in there. You signed it. Boom. It wouldn't matter if you signed it anyway. You took the class. You showed up, held by my rules. Next, let's do Robert Frost. Next. Let's do some Frost stuff.
Yeah, let's do some Frost stuff.
All right. Now I found a poem actually by a guy. Yeah, y'all never heard of Robert Warmth?
No.
He wrote this really great poem you may have heard of called The Road Less Traveled. Here it is. 2 roads diverged in wood and I took the one less traveled by. It's made all the difference.
Wait, what?
It's awesome, isn't it?
That's what we want to hear. That's the new reading.
Yeah, that's why I call it Robert Warmth. It's not so frosty.
Makes you feel warm inside.
Yeah. I'm probably going to think of a better word later, but I don't know. Robert Warmth kind of communicates clearly that it ain't frosty.
What if he did Robert Steam? It's like the opposite.
Yeah, but then it's got. But then people think I'm making like a computer joke, which made sense to like a few people. So let's do Robert Frost now, and let's talk about. We already did what? Road not taken, mowing,
Yeah.
and we'll go to next. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening. It's wonderful. Robert Condensation. I was actually gonna go for something that's like flamey and like completely dry. That's why I would go for something like spark or ash or. That probably wouldn't work. Let's see. It's really weird, but it's so strange. I always thought that this poem is like the shortest of the poems when I think about them. And granted, it very well may be, but I'm always shocked by how long this poem is when I come back to it. Are they trying to like combat my ability to delete their crap? Is that what they're trying to do?
Yes, they don't like you anymore.
Like, I feel like I used to be able to do this very easily. Now it takes a lot more effort. So see, this is like about as long as Road Not Taken. It just feels really short for some reason. It's close. Like it's not the same amount. Like the Road Not Taken is 20 lines, and this is not that many, 16. So he says, "Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." I like it.
Oh, yeah.
Always have.
That was my favorite one.
I feel like it's so accurate, especially right now as students. I feel like this is probably most of your lives where you're like, wow, I could really have some fun and enjoy my life right now if I didn't have to do all this school crap.
It's not true.
They're like, not us anymore.
And that's not true. Because you'll eventually have to go back.
Oh,
Or you should.
so this feels like freeing to you, I guess, in a weird way.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody right now is 18 just out of school, and now you got to like do this stuff and be responsible. It's like, it also felt like that way in high school too. I'm sure where you got like 50 sports you're doing on top of 8 classes. Where granted, the classes themselves aren't very hard, nor is the STAR test, but for some people it really is hard. I just felt this a day every year when I showed up and had to write in a book. And make sure that my stupid Scantron bubbles lined up with the stupid question numbers I chose. Because one year I didn't. I had to go back and erase all of them and refill them in. Because I went, oh, I got a number off.
Didn't realize it took 2 hours.
I know. I was like, so they always, every time after that, I was always like, fill out the book first, then go back and transfer it. Because if you do it as you go, you'll screw something up. But I feel like everybody kind of has that sense. And it'll go from now, like you'll end up this now. I feel like college was the time in my life where I felt like this the least. I know it sounds weird, but like if you went and you've got a job too while going to college, which is most people. Well, I didn't do that. I was like, I'm gonna ride this financial aid as long as I can in the pre-loan days. But and then grad school, I got loans, and now I hate myself. So. I feel like there's always though this sense like me, like every time I sit down to like grade, nothing against you guys, love you guys, but a little part of my soul dies. It's like getting chipped away slowly to where all that's left will be the Grinch's heart. By the time I'm 60, I'm like, these kids don't even care. What will your children not care about? Imagine that, and it's not like, I'm sitting here right now saying, man, these kids don't even care if they're right, as long as Google has it. What will your kids do? Like, I don't even care if Google has it, I guess. I'll just say it, and if I say it, it's true.
Yes.
I feel like that's what y'all have to contend with. They're like, well, if I can look it up on the internet, and I can just skip that step. And somebody says like, well, are vaccinations harmful? Yeah, they cause Satan to come into your heart and catch it on fire. That's what it does. Be like, hey, can you verify that with any information? Like going to Google. That's what you'll say to your kids. And I'll be sitting in the back going like, scholarly, peer-reviewed academic journals. And you're like, shut up, you had your time.
We don't even have that.
But I mean, I feel like everybody at some point in their life, as long as work is important to humans, it's gonna last a while. It's gonna be a long time until we stop feeling like work is our purpose. A long time. And I feel like at this point, he's definitely got, even the freaking horse is like, dude, we got places to be. He's like, but I want to watch the snow. And he's like, no, man, it's dark. It's cold. We need to go to a farmhouse. Get your butt in gear. And he's like, okay. I feel like this resonates with me. And so like he repeats the last line too. And miles to go before I sleep.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
But what did you guys feel about this poem? I love this poem. I'm sorry, I went off on it.
It's exactly what you said.
It made me remember about sometimes when I get off work really late, when it was winter and stuff, and it was icing or raining or something, and I would get in my truck after, and I would just kind of sit there for a while, and I know I had like a 30-40 minute drive home. You know, it was cold just sitting there, but then I'm just like watching people and cars move by. You know, it's just like, I would like to just sit here, especially on nights where I had them open the next morning. I'm like, well, or I could just like sleep here.
I just chill. The sad thing too is sometimes these days it's even worse because we get so depressed about not being able to just go wander through the woods or just sit and watch the cars go by that we're like, oh no, I've got crap to do, I better do it. And then somehow we end up getting on our phones instead. Do you realize that? Like it happens so often. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got that homework to do. Let me just make sure nobody said anything to me. 45 minutes later, where am I? What happened? And I'll do that sometimes, and I'm grading. Like my wife will text me, and she'll send me a picture of like Carly, and I'm like, oh, that's cute. And then like 20 minutes later, I'm like, what? No, bad. Like, and I throw it. I'm like, go away. I've got stuff to do. And as long as I'm on this phone, I can't go and be with family. And it's like it's like you weird. It's like it's that pleasure center. Like it hits.
I just turn my phone off.
Like the endorphins are crazy. There's so much reward. Next thing, list, check mark, like. I hate it. They're brilliant.
Did you see that one of the Birches was trying to ban Fortnite? Yeah.
That was stupid. You can't.
That's funny, I heard.
Although I do feel that we're not about to hit our limits. I think it's going to be a while. But I feel like the worst place it's going to be is America. I feel like the other countries will start to kind of curb cell phone usage pretty. I mean, not Paris, but France, I think they've banned cell phones in schools until the age of 17. But I think that's ultimately a good idea. The only problem is, like we're not ever gonna we're so here, like, you know, the mantra of freedom that we'll hurt ourselves with it. We're so free that it starts to hurt us, and then eventually we go, okay, well, we should stop hurting ourselves. But that makes us sort of a slow to change nation in general when it comes to new stuff like that. But that is neither here nor there. We could talk about the next poem now, which is what? Mending Wall. If anybody doesn't have a topic yet.
Oh, and also on this poem right here, I kind of really related to this one a lot, because you were talking about how
stopping by woods, or
yeah, the woods. I feel the same way because if I wake up early, a lot of times I'll walk to class instead of driving, and it is really relaxing, and it's honestly like my favorite time. Is just walk.
But you never give yourself that much time.
I know.
Right. So you try.
A lot of times you guys will see me walking to class. A lot of people have offered me rides. You guys are actually G's. I don't know, most of you are like,
but right, I mean, that's the thing where people, the assumption is there's no way he would be purposely taking longer to do something.
Exactly.
Yeah,
because we live in this society where you have to be where you're going to be next really quickly, so why would he just be walking on purpose? He's either poor.
Kennedy stopped me one time. He goes, man, is everything all right? Is there something wrong with your car? I'm like, yeah, I just walked today. What?
You can make it a lot clearer. Here, I know how to you can make it a lot clearer to people that you're just walking for fun if you go buy a pair of toe shoes.
Yeah.
Because people will be like, they'll stop and then they'll see, oh, he's wearing toe shoes. He must be doing this on purpose. I'm not, my brother, like in commerce, like he will start after and it rides at first and he got the toe shoes and then everybody's like, oh, no, he's doing this. This is some sort of like keto thing or something. And like, people just assume like, oh, this guy must eat organic stuff or something. And they're like, oh, this is one of those people who walks on purpose. I get it, man. Weirdo.
It's actually super nice.
Yeah, it really is.
When the sun's shining, 30 minutes outside walking, it's really great.
It really is. It really is nice outside, especially this time of year. So let's talk about Mending Wall, which there's a couple of things I can tell you real quick that at least this is how I think it works up north. is that like in the winter, if it's frozen long enough outside, it'll actually freeze the ground, and then the freezing of the ground, if it's a stone wall that's just all packed together, it'll just fall apart. And that's kind of what would happen in the winter. And also there were hunters that would just be hunting on people's land, and they would be like a rabbit like scurries into the spaces in the rocks, and so the freaking hunter's got to take all the stones down and he doesn't put it back up, so that his dogs can get to the rabbit. But those are the two scenarios that he's explaining here in the beginning. And he says, something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground swell under it, and spills the upper boulders in the sun, and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I've come after them and made repair where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go. Two each the boulders that have fallen, two each. And some are loaves, and some so nearly balls that we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on a side. It comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine, and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well. He says again, good fences make good neighbors. Kind of shiver at the ending. But what do you make of this one? Which one?
The neighbor.
Neighbor.
The neighbor doesn't like him.
Well, maybe not now.
Well, he just wants to be left alone. I mean, you can like somebody and want to be left alone.
Good fences make good neighbors.
Maybe it's because it's an understanding.
Avoids drama.
Maybe.
Keep your shit.
Honestly, all I could think when I read this was about Trump's wall. An actual connection to be made there, but.
I mean, it was really weird. Like, I taught this poem before Trump and his wall, and I just thought, the way I would always explain it is, I would say, like, think about like neighborhoods. You know, like some of the neighborhoods that have, like, I live in a neighborhood where we have like wood fences that are like privacy fences. So the idea is you're preserving people's, privacy. Like if I want to, let's not even use that example. People could do very private things in their backyards with the reasonable assumption that nobody could, see what they're doing. It could be like an extension of their house. But a lot of people have just chain link backyards, right? You've seen that in neighborhoods. There's like a whole set of like chain link fences that connect backyards. And so you've got this tiny little backyard that's, very little. There's not a whole lot of space to do anything. And a lot of times I wonder like what, in this poem kind of makes that point, is like, what is the point of those chain link fences? Like, what does it actually accomplish? And there's some cases where, like he says here, if there are cows, so the case here would be like, if say you had a dog, and that dog could bite somebody, and then you're liable for the dog having bitten somebody. Maybe you want a little fence for it, and that makes sense. But if there are no dogs in the neighborhood, let's say, and it's just people and they've got their stuff, then, you you have a fence there, what does that actually accomplish?
I don't know, I don't trust people that much.
I think that's.
Like, I may really like you, but
Yeah.
I would like a fence between us anyway. Like,
Um,
I
See,
don't
that's
like
why I
you
got a fence
that
around my
much.
property.
yeah. What happens if you don't have the fence? Like, let's say that somebody who is untrustworthy comes when you don't have the fence, and what do they do? That
Easy access.
easy access to what?
Your stuff.
Your stuff. Okay, so you would lose your stuff. Okay.
I feel like it's the same concept as you videoing all your classes
Uh-huh.
or always videoing whenever you're one-on-one with a student. You don't assume that something horrible is going to happen and somebody's going to make something out of it, necessarily. Maybe you do assume that. I don't assume that you assume that. So the fence, you may not assume something's going wrong, but it's kind of like the,
Security.
yes, it's the video that goes on. It's so that you can point to it and say, well, we covered all our bases.
It's peace of mind.
It's like a kid
Yes.
with a security blanket. Like, it just makes them feel comfortable.
I kind of feel that way about our property because we fence for cows and goats at our farm.
Oh yeah, and he says that makes total sense.
Yeah, but like, I still, if we didn't have any of those, we've got 6-foot fencing T-posts with 8 strings of barbed wire going through it, and it's not gonna stop anybody. It's easy to climb. I climb over them all the time on the T-posts. It's not gonna stop anybody. But even if we didn't have cows and stuff, I'd still want them to be there. It's just like, I mean, I wouldn't want people to just like walk over, you know. Oh, let's take a stroll. I don't want to see you.
I want to know what you guys think when he says
Go away.
he's mentioned that. Yes.
I think the last phrase, it's sort of like, reading it, it sort of creeps me out in his response that he says, while not going behind his father's saying because he knows it too well, he says good fences make good neighbors, and it sort of, to me, hints that his neighbor isn't really a good neighbor, but he thinks that if he can shroud himself in a good fence, then he can preserve the idea that he is a good neighbor. Like,
Oh, I can see that.
like,
Yeah, I can
he's
see that.
not particularly the nicest guy or whatever, but as long as he has his fence, that's a good fence, I'm a good neighbor.
Yeah.
And
Like, he's a good person at arm's
Have you
Yeah.
not heard of stories where neighbors get in fights over a tree and like it just sets a boundary, you know, for what's yours? You know, like, yeah.
With our place, it's more of an issue of who has to cut down the tree that's falling on the fence. You know,
Right.
It's like,
Just-
well, the stump's on like your side, but like it fell mostly on my side. So like one time there was like, just cut it in half. You take that part because it was like
Split the work.
it was like a several ton tree. It was like, well, where are we gonna put this?
He's mentioned a couple times in these poems. I think he has a reason for it, but he says something there is that doesn't love a wall that wants it down. And he says, I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Like elves that would be knocking the boulders down. But I think what he does here is he uses something that's sort of neutral and obviously not real, like elves, so that you'll sort of fill it in with that whatever you think might be knocking the wall down. So every single time the wall gets knocked down, they've got to go put it back up. So what do you think is knocking down the wall?
The
Animals.
The hunters.
No, he's saying like the hunters is another thing. He's saying the hunters is another thing. Well, I mean, he sort of says that. But every year, like, you know, the frozen ground swells and then the boulders knock off and then they have to come and fix it.
Oh, it's the weather, isn't it?
So the weather to you, so just,
It's,
so the elves in this case would be like, I guess, Mother Nature.
yeah.
I mean,
Nature
I mean,
itself
because
doesn't want the
it
wall.
wears down, deteriorates, you know.
depending on what kind of soil you're built on, things are gonna change depending on the weather because
Santa Claus,
No.
the sleigh,
I think he's implying that
kind of him. I feel like it's him.
who, the guy? The poem?
Frost, whoever.
Oh, whoa, really?
Because he says he could say elves. I
Yeah.
feel like that's just like being kind of ridiculous.
I think he's implying that whoever.
That's what the wall is.
I think he's implying that whoever it is that believes in a God and a creation of a universe, it's your God. Your God keeps breaking on the walls, and you keep building them right back up.
Oh, that's getting deeper than I want.
Yeah, I was going to stick with Mother Nature.
Or if you don't believe in that sort of thing, fate. Interesting. There's an interesting story I have to tell you about. There is a YouTube TED Talk, and I won't show you the whole TED Talk, but oh man, I don't remember the guy's name. Let me go to YouTube. I'm not going to show you the whole TED Talk. I'm just going to skip through and show you images. TED Talk grazing, desertification. Yeah, this guy. So let's see.
Perfect storm is bearing.
So right now he's talking, like, he starts out by talking about kind of like climate change and how people are talking about how the desertification, you know what desertification is? It's like the world is becoming more and more desert. He's been talking about desertification and how it's been causing a problem. And he actually was doing some work in Africa and how to, like, you know, help these lands get back to the way that they should be. Let me see if I can find some of the images he's pointing out. So he's looking at kind of some areas over here, I think, in Africa. And the assumption was that as water and carbon evaporate or get out of the soil, or I think it's water, they were like every time there's a big rain, it should like stay and then that things could grow. But what they found is like in this one area of like, oh, I guess he's already talking about it. I forgot it. Let me just, I'll explain what he was saying. So there's this place in Africa where they thought that the tribes that were there were causing the area to be desertified. So what they did was they took the tribal people off the lands and they said, okay, well, the lands will get better. And they got worse. And they said, okay, because it was what the tribes were doing was killing all these animals or whatever. And then the animals were nothing that was left, and they were grazing. And the animals started sort of overrunning the area, and
overgrazing
or something. There was something going on with elephants specifically. He loved elephants, and they were killing elephants. That's what was happening. They were killing elephants, and so he got rid of the tribes. But then, and the guy, this old guy, loves elephants. It was like his favorite thing was elephants. He loved researching elephants. And they had to kill like 20, 40, 60,000 of them after this because they thought it would help make the land start to regrow better because it was apparently the elephants were overgrazing. Still kept getting worse. So he felt really bad about that and was like, wow, I totally did the wrong thing. And what they found out afterwards was that basically the way that we have changed the way nature works. So let me see if I can find some of his examples here. We have changed like the way that nature works, and animals used to just freely graze over all land. They would just wander, but now we have them all fenced off. And so they graze on one set of land, and they'll sometimes overgraze on that land and kill the land, but if they're left to just wander the countryside, and basically what happens is they stamp down, the idea was always that if they, like it's really weird, but like they thought if we could just get the grass to grow through like a rain. Interestingly, the stepping on the grass and pooping on it was a really important part of the process. It would help the new growth next year. And they had some like, they took this, and all they did was they took this basically desert landscape and trained some people to like graze these animals across the land in a certain way. It was, what would they call it? Like mimicking the way they would have done it naturally years ago.
Sometimes they call it pasturing.
I guess. I don't remember what he called it, but they would like get them to go across it, and like they said, but there's not even grass to feed on. It's like, doesn't matter. Just take them across. And like this ended up being what it was like afterwards. Like it just suddenly grew like grass again. And then this was an area in Mexico, and that's what it looks like now.
Wow.
after they did this change. So like basically when they took animals and put them back wandering across the countryside the way that they were sort of always meant to, it changes the landscape. So I think that was like a place in Utah where it was happening, and then like that's it now. But it's just really, it's really weird that like, and I think he's you could take it as nature, where like nature is sort of saying every time people build walls, the reason that they deteriorate is because it's not really meant to have them. It's supposed to just be this landscape. And so in building walls, we create this false sense of like where animals can and can't go, which, you know, damages nature. But I think it's yet another compelling thing that's really happening that kind of points out yet another thing about the poem, that the way in which we separate each other actually makes ourselves worse, and not just from a human standpoint, from a nature standpoint.
That you say that, because I was actually just recently reading something that's actually talking about this exact sort of thing with if they built like the entirety of the Donald Trump's wall from beginning to end, they were talking about it would disrupt like massive migrations of animals and this sort of thing would start to happen.
Yeah. Oh, I never even read about that.
Yeah, they were talking about like it would be because there's like a lot of animals that go like back and forth.
Yeah.
And if they built this giant concrete wall for 2,000 miles, it would disrupt like mass migrations of animals and throw all the wildlife at the border into like complete chaos.
Well, I think that right now it's really more or less just like a fence, like an advanced fence. But what they've built so far is like these corrugated like iron. I don't know what they're made of, but they're like these big iron looking posts that I think small animals could still get through. Or were they talking like big animals like?
I don't remember. Deer. Like all
oh, deer. That's much bigger than what would fit.
Yeah.
Because the holes are like that big.
Goat fence?
A
goat fence section is 6 by 6 holes.
It looks like this. So it's got like a solid kind of piece at the top, and it's got like fencing posts, and it looks like that.
That's very odd.
Yeah, it's really weird. But that's what's been built. Which I think.
It looks like sheet metal. That's what I thought. I saw that and I was like, is that the side of a barn?
Tornado comes through.
I've always had a theory on why he wants the wall in the first place. One, they started telling him about it in his campaign, and they thought it would be like a great campaign point, and he started saying it. I think honestly, he heard about he thought about the Great Wall of China, and I think he wanted there to be, and there was Obamacare, and so he wanted a thing named after him. So he wanted to be like Trump's wall, like the Wall of Trump, like the Great Wall of Trump. I think he wanted like a monument you could see from space. Because I mean, look at the way the guy operates, right? He's got Trump towers all over the world, and he loves having the biggest tower in wherever he's building, which I think is kind of compelling argument for why he wants a monument that, at least informally, has his name on it. I don't think he's going to be happy if they say, we're going to call this the United States border wall. He'd be like, well, we can call it Trump's wall. Wall of Trump. Actually, he'll probably he would call it the Great Wall of Trump, and then like Trump is like this, and then it'd be like registered trademark. So he's like, it's mine.
What do you guys call the wall? We call it the Dawn.
Oh my gosh, did we really just get through Mending Wall and stopping by Woods? We didn't even get to after Birches or after apple picking.
Nope.
I'll say just real quick what those kind of are about with the quiz questions. That way they can be done. After apple picking is like he does a lot of hard work. The hard work kind of gets into his head. He's thinking about it over and over and over again. It makes its way into his dreams, and he sort of has these bad feelings about the apples that he didn't quite pick. And then he wonders if he'll be able to sleep well after having, these dreams. But I think the comparison I've always made is if it's like a poet or an artist who cultivates an idea. So you're going to like worry about the ones that you let get away, and the ones that you did cultivate and you actually were managed able to pick those well, those are going to be like the ones that but some of them you just drop and you don't handle correctly and they go to the cider apple heap. And that's how I kind of take it for the quiz. But Birches is more or less like it's best to live life, not let it live you, because he talks about how the storms usually break the trees, but he'd like to break the trees by playing on all of them one at a time until they eventually are all bent. So instead of having life bear down upon you, it would be better if we could all live life by using it up so much that then it was used up. Like we wear ourselves out instead of being worn out by life, you know? That's why I've always thought it's very strange people live for retirement. I was like, by that time you're already broken down, and then you're like, now let's have fun. I'd be like, I'd much rather live my life as I go. But yeah, y'all have a good one.